I'm Melissa, 32, sitting alone in my childhood bedroom while laughter echoes from downstairs. Another Christmas morning, another empty space beneath the tree where my gifts should be. Since I was 15, my family has forgotten me every December 25th. No presents, no place setting, sometimes no acknowledgement I exist. But this year would be different. After 17 years of being the family ghost at Christmas, I was about to remind them I existed in a way they'd never forget. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our storytelling family. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this holiday revenge unfolds. My family looks perfect on paper. My father Richard is a successful business owner who built his real estate empire from scratch, something he never lets anyone forget. My mother Barbara comes from Old Money and Chairs, 3 different charity boards in our community. They live in a sprawling colonial home in one of Connecticut's most exclusive neighborhoods, where appearances matter more than anything. Then there are my siblings. My older sister Stephanie, now 36, was the golden child homecoming queen, valedictorian, and now a successful corporate attorney with 2 perfect children. My brother Jason, 34, was the athletic star football scholarships, state championships, and now a financial advisor working for my father's company. And then there was me, stuck in the middle with an inconvenient passion for art and literature rather than business or law. The first time they forgot me at Christmas, I was 15. I came downstairs that morning, excited like any teenager would be, only to find no presents with my name. At first, I thought it was a mistake or maybe a prank. The stockings hung perfectly on the mantel, one for Dad, Mom, Stephanie, Jason, and even the family dog Cooper, but nothing for me. "Mom," I asked, my voice small as I stood in my pajamas while everyone else was already opening gifts. "Where are my presents?" My mother looked up, her perfectly manicured brows furrowing in what appeared to be confusion. "Oh, Melissa, did we forget to put yours out? Richard, did you see Melissa's gifts?" My father barely glanced up from the expensive watch he was admiring a gift from my mother. "No. I thought you handled the kids' gifts this year." "It must have been an oversight," my mother said with a dismissive wave. "We've been so busy with the charity gala." What hurt most wasn't just the lack of presents, it was how they continued their celebration as if nothing was wrong. Stephanie shot me a small smirk when our parents weren't looking. Jason avoided eye contact completely. That same day, when we sat down for Christmas dinner, there was no place setting for me. I stood awkwardly by the dining table until my Aunt Kathleen, my mother's sister, noticed. "Barbara, where's Melissa supposed to sit?" she asked. "Oh goodness," my mother laughed that tinkling laugh she used at social functions. "I must be losing my mind. Richard, can you grab another chair and setting for Melissa?" My father sighed dramatically, as if I was creating an inconvenience, before reluctantly setting a place for me, squeezed in at the corner of the table where the leaf didn't quite fit properly. Later, when it was time for the annual family Christmas photo, I was somehow left out again. "Melissa, where were you?" my mother asked after the photographer had packed up. We called for everyone. I had been sitting in the living room the entire time. No one had called for me. That night, I cried myself to sleep, confused and hurt. I told myself it really was just an oversight, that next year would be different. But deep down, a part of me already knew this wasn't an accident. The following year, I tried everything to make sure I wouldn't be forgotten. I helped my mother with Christmas decorations. I baked cookies with Stephanie, who accidentally knocked my batch to the floor. I even asked my father directly what time we would be opening presents. Yet, Christmas morning came, and there I was again watching my family exchange gifts while I sat invisible on the stairs. This time, the excuse was that they thought I wanted more grown-up gifts and they'd take me shopping after the holidays. That shopping trip never happened. By the time I was 17, a pattern had been firmly established. Each Christmas, I was systematically excluded from every tradition, followed by flimsy excuses and gaslighting that left me questioning my own experiences. "You're being so dramatic" became my mother's favorite phrase. "Not everything is about you, Melissa," my father would say when I tried to bring it up. What made it all worse was our family's social media presence. My parents and siblings loved posting elaborate family Christmas photos on Instagram and Facebook. Perfect compositions of holiday joy and togetherness. Somehow, I was always missing from these photos. If I managed to be in one, it would never be the one they posted. Online, it was as if I didn't exist in my own family. By the time I reached college, the Christmas exclusion had become so normalized that I developed severe anxiety as the holiday season approached. While other students excitedly discussed going home, I dreaded December like most people fear tax audits. The psychological toll was immense. I'd have panic attacks just seeing Christmas decorations go up around campus. During my sophomore year at art school, I met Lauren in my color theory class. She became the first person I ever trusted enough to confide in about my family's strange tradition. "That's not normal, Mel," she said firmly after I'd minimized the situation, calling it just a silly family thing. "I know it's weird, but they don't mean anything by it," I defended, still caught in the web of denial I'd built around myself. Lauren shook her head. "No, listen to me. That's emotional abuse. Plain and simple." Having someone finally name it sent me spiraling. For years, I'd been told I was oversensitive, dramatic, making mountains out of molehills. But Lauren saw through it immediately. When I was 20, Lauren came home with me for Christmas break since her family was vacationing in Europe. I was terrified what would happen with an outside witness present. Would my family finally behave normally? They didn't. In fact, they escalated. Christmas morning, there were beautiful, wrapped presents for Lauren, a guest they'd never met before, but nothing for me. When Lauren noticed, my mother smiled sweetly. "Oh, Melissa doesn't really care for Christmas gifts, do you, honey? She's always been so independent." I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. Lauren's wide eyes met mine across the room. Later, at dinner, there was again no place for me until Lauren pointed it out. My father's explanation? "Melissa usually eats in the kitchen. She prefers it that way." I had never once eaten Christmas dinner in the kitchen. The gaslighting was so blatant that Lauren later told me she felt like she was in a psychological horror film. "They're trying to make you and anyone who notices feel crazy for seeing what's plainly happening," she whispered to me that night. Lauren's validation became my lifeline. For the first time, I wasn't questioning my own perception. Someone else saw it too. But the pattern continued. When my sister Stephanie married Eric 3 years later, he seamlessly joined the family tradition of pretending I didn't exist during the holidays. The first Christmas after their wedding, I overheard Eric laughing with my brother Jason. "So, we're still doing the Melissa thing, right?" he asked. Stephanie told me about it, but I wanted to make sure. "Oh yeah," Jason replied. "Mom and Dad would be disappointed if we stopped now. It's kind of hilarious how she still shows up every year expecting something different." Their words cut through me like ice. It wasn't just my parents, my siblings were active participants, and they'd recruited Eric into their game. I developed coping mechanisms to survive. I threw myself into my art, using the pain as fuel for creativity. I limited my visits home to the absolute minimum required to keep up appearances. I created excuses to leave early on Christmas Day, fabricated work emergencies, fictional friends in need. My therapist later told me these were classic trauma responses: avoidance, compartmentalization, channeling pain into productivity. I wasn't dealing with the wound. I was just finding ways to function despite it. By my mid-20s, I had a growing career as an artist, with my work being featured in small galleries. None of my family ever attended my shows. When I mentioned an upcoming exhibition at Thanksgiving one year, my mother cut me off to ask Stephanie about her recent courtroom victory. The message was clear. My achievements didn't count. The psychological damage manifested in other ways too. I struggled with relationships, always expecting to be forgotten or replaced. I apologized constantly for taking up space. I became hyper-independent to an unhealthy degree, refusing help even when I desperately needed it. The holidays became a yearly reminder that in my family's eyes, I was forgettable, a ghost haunting the periphery of their perfect family portrait. 2 years ago, at age 30, everything changed. I had built a relatively successful career as a graphic designer despite my family's dismissal. My work was gaining recognition in the industry, and I had just landed a major client that would financially secure my independent studio for at least 2 years. I had also met Tyler, a kind and perceptive writer who saw through my carefully constructed walls. Unlike previous relationships where I'd kept my family situation vague, with Tyler, I shared everything. He listened without judgment, but with growing concern. "You know you don't have to keep going home for Christmas, right?" he asked one night as we lay in bed, my anxiety spiking as December approached. "They're still my family," I said weakly. "Family doesn't treat people this way," he countered. "At least come with me to my parents for part of the holiday. They already love you from Thanksgiving." Tyler's family had been overwhelmingly warm when I'd joined them for Thanksgiving, making sure I was included in every conversation, asking about my work, genuinely interested in getting to know me. The contrast to my own family was jarring. Still, I insisted on going home for at least Christmas Eve morning. Tyler reluctantly agreed to come with me. That Christmas became the breaking point I didn't know I needed. It started with the annual family Christmas card photo shoot. I had deliberately stayed present, sitting in the living room where the photographer was setting up. I excused myself to use the bathroom, and when I returned less than 5 minutes later, they were just finishing up. "Oh, Melissa!" My mother feigned surprise. "We thought you were still upstairs getting ready. We just finished the photos." The photographer looked confused. "I can still take a few with everyone if—" "No need," my father interrupted. "We got what we needed." Later that evening, Tyler noticed my brother and sister laughing at something on their phones. When I glanced over, I caught a glimpse of a group chat titled Family Christmas 2023 with several participants, none of whom were me. "Do you have a family group chat?" I asked casually. Jason quickly locked his phone. "Just coordinating some gift stuff," he mumbled. That night, while helping my mother with dishes after dinner, I overheard her speaking to our neighbor Mrs. Campbell in the dining room. "The holidays are always so special with the children home," my mother was saying, "though it's really just the two now that they're adults. Stephanie with her beautiful family, and Jason handling the business side of things with Richard." "What about your other daughter?" Mrs. Campbell asked. "The artistic one?" There was a pause. "Oh, Melissa does her own thing," my mother replied dismissively. "She's not really involved in family matters." I stood frozen in the kitchen, a plate dripping in my hands. 30 years of existence reduced to not really involved in family matters. The final straw came Christmas morning. As usual, there were no gifts for me under the tree. But this year, my cousin Rebecca, who had always seemed to enjoy my family's treatment of me, decided to twist the knife. "Melissa, did you check all the packages? Maybe yours are just hidden in the back," she suggested with fake concern. "There's nothing for her," my mother said curtly. "Again?" Rebecca gasped with exaggerated surprise. "That's like, what, the 15th year in a row you guys have forgotten Melissa at Christmas? That has to be some kind of record." She laughed, looking around for others to join in. To my horror, my family did laugh, all except Tyler, who sat beside me, his face darkening with each passing second. "Actually, it's been 17 years, I said quietly. The room went silent. 17 years of being systematically excluded from Christmas. 17 years of gaslighting and excuses. 17 years of being made to feel crazy for noticing I'm the only one who never gets presents, never has a place setting, never appears in the family photos. My voice was shaking, but I kept going, years of hurt pouring out. And the worst part is, you all think it's funny. You've turned my exclusion into a family tradition. My mother's face hardened. "If you're going to be dramatic, perhaps you should go upstairs until you can compose yourself." Tyler stood up. "No, she shouldn't. What's happening here is abusive, and I'm not going to sit by and watch." "This is a family matter," my father said coldly. "You're just a guest who got Christmas presents from you, unlike your own daughter," Tyler shot back. We left less than an hour later, my things hastily packed, Tyler's hand steady on my back as we walked to the car. I broke down completely once we were driving away, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. "I can't do it anymore," I gasped between sobs. "I can't keep pretending this is normal." Tyler pulled over and held me while I cried. When I had no tears left, he looked me in the eyes and said the words that would change everything. "You have two choices, Melissa. Either you address this situation head-on and demand the respect you deserve, or you stop subjecting yourself to people who have made hurting you an annual tradition. What you can't do is keep going back, expecting things to change when they've shown you for 17 years exactly who they are. Something broke and reset inside me that day. I knew he was right. This couldn't continue. The new year began with me starting therapy, real therapy, with Dr. Harris, a specialist in family trauma. Not the half-hearted sessions I'd tried in my 20s where I'd minimized my experiences, too afraid to acknowledge the depth of the dysfunction. What you're describing follows patterns of narcissistic family dynamics, Dr. Harris explained during our third session. In these systems, there's often a scapegoat, someone who becomes the family's emotional garbage can. Everything that doesn't fit the family's preferred narrative gets projected onto this person. But why me? I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. What made me the target? Often it's the child who's different in some way, more sensitive, more creative, less willing to conform. Sometimes it's completely arbitrary. But what's important to understand is that this isn't about anything you did wrong. It's about a dysfunctional family system that needed someone to fill this role. Dr. Harris encouraged me to explore my family history beyond my immediate experiences. This led me to reach out to relatives I rarely spoke with, seeking patterns I might have missed. My father's mother, Grandma Lillian, had passed years ago, but my mother's mother was still alive, though estranged from our family. Through careful questioning of more distant relatives, I discovered my mother had a younger sister I'd never met, Aunt Patricia, who had been completely cut off from the family before I was born. No one talks about Patricia. My mother's cousin Nancy told me when I called her. There was some big falling out in the 80s. Barbara acts like she never existed. With some internet sleuthing, I found Patricia living just 2 states away. I reached out with a careful email explaining who I was and asking if she'd be willing to talk. Her response came within hours. "Melissa, I've wondered about my sister's children for years. I'd be happy to talk, though I suspect it won't be a pleasant conversation." She was right. Our first video call revealed disturbing parallels. Patricia had been the family scapegoat in her generation, creative, questioning, unwilling to simply go along with family expectations. She described holidays where her gifts would mysteriously get lost, or where she'd be excluded from family photographs. "It started when I was about 14, she told me. After I won a state writing competition that got me attention our mother hadn't received. Suddenly, I was forgotten at Christmas, my birthday, family events. Eventually, I was written out completely. The generational pattern was unmistakable. But Patricia had more to share. Have you looked into the financial side of things?" she asked. In our family, emotional abuse always had financial components. I hadn't. Despite my suspicions, I'd never actually investigated the financial aspects of my family's situation. With Patricia's guidance, I began digging. What I discovered was shocking. My parents had established trust funds for all 3 children when we were born, standard practice in wealthy families. But while Stephanie and Jason's trusts had been faithfully maintained and grown, mine had been systematically drained through a series of administrative fees and questionable investments that always seemed to fail. I hired a forensic accountant who confirmed my worst fears. My inheritance had been quietly pillaged for years. My siblings each stood to inherit millions, while my share had dwindled to almost nothing. Even more disturbing was the revelation about my apartment. When I turned 25, my parents had gifted me a small art studio apartment in the city, the one generous act I'd always clung to as proof they must love me on some level. But the forensic accountant discovered the property had actually been placed in my name with a secret mortgage I knew nothing about. For years, I'd been unknowingly accumulating debt while thinking I owned the property outright. "This isn't just emotional abuse," my accountant said grimly. "This crosses into financial fraud." The final piece of the puzzle came when I reconnected with my maternal grandfather, William. At 92, he was sharp as ever and living in an upscale retirement community. When I visited him, his eyes filled with tears. "I've tried to check on you over the years, but Barbara always interfered," he said, holding my hand with surprising strength. "She said you wanted nothing to do with the family, that you were troubled. I should have tried harder to reach you directly." Grandfather William shared that he'd never approved of how my parents parented me. He'd noticed the pattern early but had been systematically kept away from me through carefully orchestrated family events where I was conveniently absent. "I've been keeping records," he said, leading me to his home office where he unlocked a file cabinet. Inside were meticulously organized folders documenting financial transactions within the family business, including evidence that my parents had been systematically writing me out of the will through a series of amendments. "I may be old, but I'm not blind," he said firmly. "And I've never believed in cutting off your own blood." Armed with evidence from multiple sources, the picture was now painfully clear. My Christmas exclusion was just the visible tip of a massive iceberg of family dysfunction, betrayal, and actual financial abuse that had been occurring for most of my life. My meeting with Grandfather William marked the beginning of what I came to think of as my secret alliance, a network of support that grew as I continued to investigate my family's treatment of me. William became my third ally after Lauren and Tyler, providing not just emotional validation, but actual documentation of the financial machinations that had been happening behind my back. "Your parents have been diverting funds from your trust since you were 16, William explained as we went through his records. "Small amounts at first, then larger transfers once you were in college. I suspect it started right around the time the Christmas exclusion began." "But why?" I asked, still struggling to understand the depth of the betrayal. "They're already wealthy. Why steal from me specifically?" "It was never about the money itself," William said, his eyes sad but clear. "It was about control and punishment. Barbara did the same thing to Patricia years ago." William introduced me to his estate attorney, who helped me understand the full scope of what had been happening. But the biggest revelation came when William revealed my siblings' involvement. "Stephanie and Jason aren't just aware of what's happening, they're beneficiaries," he said, showing me documents where my diverted funds had been channeled into their accounts and investments. "They've been actively participating in your financial disinheritance." The knowledge that my siblings weren't just passive participants but active conspirators in my financial abuse was devastating. All those years of thinking Jason might secretly sympathize with me, or that Stephanie's cruelty was just sibling rivalry, all illusions. With William's encouragement, I reached out to the family's long-standing lawyer, Jacob Morris. It took 3 attempts before he agreed to meet me for coffee at a quiet cafe far from my parents' social circles. "I can't discuss confidential client matters," Jacob said nervously, as soon as we sat down. "I'm not asking you to betray confidentiality," I assured him. "I just want to understand if what I've discovered about my financial situation is accurate." Jacob fidgeted with his coffee cup. "I've been uncomfortable with certain aspects of your parents' estate planning for years," he finally admitted. "There have been unusual movements regarding your portion." Though he wouldn't provide specific documents, his discomfort was confirmation enough. As our conversation progressed, Jacob's professional reserve cracked slightly. "Your father has made some concerning business decisions recently," he said in a lowered voice. "There are potential legal issues on the horizon that the family has been keeping quiet. Investigations into some of their real estate developments." This was news potential leverage I hadn't anticipated. As I built my alliance, I found unexpected support from my Aunt Patricia, who had rebuilt her life after being cut off from the family. Now a successful author, she had channeled her family trauma into award-winning fiction. "The best revenge is living well," she told me over dinner at her home. "But the second best is making sure they can't do to others what they did to you." Patricia introduced me to her own financial advisor, who helped me understand how to protect what assets I did have and how to legally address the fraudulent mortgage situation. Over the next few months, my network expanded to include a specialized therapist, financial advisors, and legal experts, all working with me to document and address both the emotional and financial abuse. Meanwhile, my grandfather William made a significant decision. He revised his own will, creating a trust specifically for me that couldn't be touched by my parents. "I can't undo all the harm they've done," he said, "but I can ensure they don't control your future." Tyler remained my emotional rock throughout this process, providing unwavering support while expressing increasing concern about the toll the investigation was taking. "I just want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons," he said one night. "Is this about justice or revenge?" "Maybe both," I admitted. "Is that wrong?" "No," he said after consideration. After what they've done, you deserve both. I just don't want this to consume you. His concern was valid. I had been pouring every spare moment into building my case, sometimes at the expense of my art and well-being. With his encouragement, I began developing healthier boundaries around the investigation, setting aside time for my work and our relationship. As another Christmas approached, I faced a decision: confront my family with what I'd discovered or walk away entirely. After much soul-searching and consultation with Dr. Harris, I chose confrontation. Some people might advise you to simply cut ties, Dr. Harris said, and that would be valid. But I sense you need closure not just for your peace of mind, but to break this cycle definitively. With my alliance in place and my evidence organized, I began planning the confrontation that would finally end 17 years of systematic exclusion and abuse. The 6 months leading up to Christmas became a period of intense preparation, not just gathering evidence, but strengthening myself emotionally for what would undoubtedly be a devastating confrontation. Dr. Harris and I worked extensively on preparation techniques. You need to be ready for every possible reaction, she cautioned. Denial, rage, tears, manipulation. They'll try every tactic to regain control of the narrative. We role-played different scenarios, with Dr. Harris taking on the personas of my family members, throwing their most cutting remarks and gaslighting phrases at me, while I practiced remaining calm and centered. "You're destroying this family with your delusions," she'd say, channeling my mother's icy tone. "These aren't delusions," I'd practice responding. "They're documented facts, and I'm not responsible for the consequences of actions you chose to take." Parallel to this emotional preparation, I was working with financial and legal advisors to build an ironclad case. Jacob, though still technically my parents' lawyer, had become increasingly uncomfortable with their actions and provided crucial guidance without explicitly sharing confidential information. "Focus on the mortgage fraud," he advised during one of our discreet meetings. "That's the clearest legal violation and the hardest for them to explain away." With the help of a forensic accountant, I created detailed documentation showing the systematic financial abuse, the draining of my trust fund, the fraudulent mortgage, the deliberate exclusion from family business opportunities given to my siblings, and the pattern of amendments to my parents' will that increasingly reduced my inheritance. Grandfather William continued to provide historical context and documentation from his own records. "Your mother did exactly the same thing to Patricia 30 years ago," he reminded me. "The pattern is undeniable." As my case built, my artistic career was flourishing in ways I'd never expected. The emotional processing through therapy had unlocked something in my work, and my latest series, Abstract Explorations of Family Dynamics and Emotional Absence, had caught the attention of several prominent galleries. I received an offer for my first solo exhibition in a respected New York gallery, scheduled for the spring following the confrontation. This success became another form of preparation financial independence that would protect me regardless of the outcome with my family. Tyler was concerned about the toll this was taking, despite my professional success. "You're having nightmares again," he pointed out one morning after I'd woken up screaming, about being locked in a glass case while my family ate Christmas dinner, unable to hear me pounding on the glass. "It's part of the process," I assured him. "Dr. Harris says it's my subconscious processing the trauma." But he wasn't entirely convinced. "I'm worried about what this confrontation will do to you, even if it goes exactly as planned." His concern led us to develop not just a confrontation strategy, but an aftercare plan. Lauren offered her family's cabin in Vermont as a retreat location for after Christmas, somewhere peaceful where Tyler and I could decompress regardless of the outcome. As December approached, we finalized the logistical details. I would attend the family Christmas as usual, but this time with Tyler, Lauren, and my Aunt Patricia as witnesses. Grandfather William would join for Christmas dinner, something my mother couldn't reasonably refuse given his status in the family. I prepared multiple copies of key documents, expecting my parents might try to destroy evidence in the moment. One set remained with my lawyer, another with Lauren, and a third securely stored in a cloud account only I could access. I purchased small recording devices, legal in our state with one-party consent, to ensure the confrontation couldn't later be denied or rewritten. The strategic decision about timing was crucial. After much consideration, I decided the confrontation would happen during Christmas dinner, when the extended family would be present. This wasn't about public humiliation, it was about ensuring there were witnesses who couldn't be manipulated into forgetting or denying what occurred. In the final weeks before Christmas, I focused on centering myself. I developed new holiday traditions with Tyler, and my chosen family cookie baking with Lauren, a winter solstice celebration with Patricia, quiet evenings by the fire with Tyler. "Whatever happens with your family," Tyler said as we watched the snow fall outside our apartment window, "we have this. We're building our own traditions that have nothing to do with exclusion or cruelty." His words became a mantra I returned to when anxiety threatened to overwhelm me. This confrontation wasn't just about the past, it was about reclaiming my future, creating space for joy and connection that wasn't shadowed by expectation of pain. The night before Christmas Eve, as we packed for the trip to my parents' house, Tyler held me close. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that you're not that forgotten girl anymore. You're a woman who refused to let them write her out of existence." With our bags packed, documentation organized, and alliance in place, I was as ready as I'd ever be to face the family that had been pretending I didn't exist for 17 years. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp winter day that normally graced my family's carefully curated holiday photos. Tyler squeezed my hand as we pulled up to my parents' imposing colonial home. Its perfectly symmetrical reeds and twinkling white lights, a tableau of holiday perfection. "Remember, you're not alone this time," he said, his voice steady despite the tension obvious in his shoulders. Lauren's car pulled up behind us, followed by Patricia's rental. The plan was for them to arrive slightly after us, allowing me to establish the initial dynamic before my support system became visible. My mother opened the door with her camera-ready smile, which faltered slightly at seeing Tyler. "Melissa, we weren't expecting additional guests." "Tyler's hardly a guest, Mom. He's my partner of 2 years," I replied calmly, "and I mentioned I was bringing him when I confirmed last week." She recovered quickly, ushering us in with practiced hospitality that never quite reached her eyes. Of course. Come in, it's freezing out." The house was impeccable as always, garlands draped perfectly along the staircase. The massive tree in the living room laden with color-coordinated ornaments, the scent of cinnamon and pine, creating the perfect holiday atmosphere. Everything designed to project the image of the perfect family Christmas. My father barely looked up from his newspaper when we entered the living room, offering a cursory nod before returning to the business section. Stephanie and her husband Eric were already there with their children, as was Jason with his new girlfriend Megan, whom I'd never met before. The familiar knot formed in my stomach as I scanned the room, noting the stockings on the mantel, none with my name, as expected, and the presents under the tree, beautifully wrapped in coordinated paper. A quick glance confirmed my prediction. Not a single tag bore my name. For 17 years, this moment had been the beginning of my holiday humiliation. This year, it was simply confirmation of what I already knew and had meticulously documented. The doorbell rang, and my mother's surprise was evident when she returned with Lauren, Patricia, and finally, Grandfather William, who had arranged to arrive slightly later. "William!" my mother exclaimed, genuine shock in her voice. "We weren't expecting you until dinner." "I decided to come early, Barbara," he said, his voice still commanding despite his age. "I wanted to spend the full day with family. All of my family." His emphasis on all was subtle but unmistakable. My mother's face tightened for a fraction of a second before her social mask slipped back into place. "Patricia," she said, her voice noticeably cooler. "This is unexpected." "I invited her," I said simply. "It's been too long since we've had a full family Christmas, don't you think?" The morning proceeded according to the usual script. Presents were distributed with elaborate ceremony, exclamations over each gift, careful photographs taken of the recipients' delighted reactions. As in every year previous, there was nothing for me. When all the gifts had been opened, my mother turned to me with practiced concern. "Melissa, I don't see anything for you under the tree. Did you check all the packages?" For the first time in 17 years, I didn't play along with the gaslighting. "There's nothing for me, Mom," just like there hasn't been for 17 years. But that's fine, I didn't come for presents. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Stephanie glanced nervously at our father, whose jaw had tightened at my deviation from the script. "Well," my mother said brightly, clearly attempting to move past the moment. "Shall we start preparing for dinner? Stephanie, would you help me in the kitchen?" The day progressed with mounting tension. My parents attempted to maintain the facade of normalcy, but my support system's presence clearly unnerved them. When it came time to set the table for Christmas dinner, I watched silently as my mother once again arranged settings for everyone except me. Lauren caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. It was time. As everyone gathered around the elaborately set dining table, the absence of my place setting was glaringly obvious. Grandfather William spoke up first. "Barbara, there seems to be a setting missing for Melissa." My mother flushed slightly. "Oh, how careless of me. Richard, would you grab another chair and setting for Melissa?" My father sighed dramatically, as he had for 17 years. But before he could move, I spoke up. "Actually, this is perfect. Before we begin dinner, there's something I need to address with all of you." I retrieved my portfolio of documentation from my bag and placed it on the table. For 17 years, I've been systematically excluded from this family. It began with forgetting me at Christmas, no presents, no place setting, no inclusion in family photos. I spent years thinking I was crazy for noticing, years blaming myself, years making excuses for all of you. The room had gone completely still. My mother's smile had frozen on her face. My father's expression had darkened dangerously. "Melissa, this is hardly the time my father began." But I cut him off. "Actually, this is exactly the time. Christmas has been your chosen setting for excluding me for nearly 2 decades. It seems fitting to address it now." I opened the portfolio and began laying out documents on the table. What began as emotional cruelty expanded to financial abuse. Here are the records showing how my trust fund was systematically drained while Stephanie's and Jason's grew. Here is documentation of the fraudulent mortgage you placed in my name without my knowledge or consent. Here are the amendments to your will that increasingly reduced my inheritance until I was effectively disinherited. My mother's face had drained of color. "These are private family matters that are not appropriate to discuss in front of guests," she hissed. "These aren't guests, Mom. These are witnesses. People who can't be manipulated into pretending they didn't see what happened." I continued laying out documents. And this isn't just a private family matter when it involves fraud and financial abuse. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "That's enough. I will not be accused in my own home by my own daughter." "Sit down, Richard," Grandfather William said quietly. "You'll want to hear this, because the alternative is hearing it from attorneys." My father's face reddened, but something in William's tone made him slowly retake his seat. I turned to my siblings. "Stephanie, Jason, you weren't just aware of what was happening. You actively participated. The diverted funds from my trust went directly into accounts in your names. You knowingly benefited from my exclusion and financial abuse." Stephanie's perfect composure cracked. "That's not we didn't," she stammered, looking to our father for guidance. I pressed on. "I've spent the past year building this case with financial experts, legal advisors, and family members who were similarly treated. I'm not here to ask why anymore. I'm here to tell you it stops now." "This is preposterous," my mother finally managed, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You've always been unstable, Melissa. This fabricated persecution complex has gone too far. Perhaps you should seek professional help." "She already has." Dr. Harris spoke up from where she sat beside Lauren. "I'm Dr. Harris, Melissa's therapist. What she's experiencing is consistent with the effects of long-term family scapegoating and gaslighting." My mother's eyes widened in horror at having a mental health professional witness her behavior. "You brought your therapist to Christmas dinner? This is beyond inappropriate." "What's inappropriate," Patricia interjected, "is systematically abusing your child for 17 years and expecting her to remain silent. You did the same to me, Barbara, but Melissa is braver than I was." The confrontation escalated as my father realized the seriousness of the situation. He stood again, looming over the table. I don't know what you hope to accomplish with this theatrical display, but if you think you can threaten this family, it's not a threat, Dad, I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It's a choice. You can acknowledge what you've done, make financial restitution for the fraud and theft, and we can work towards some kind of relationship in the future. Or you can continue to deny everything, in which case my next step is legal action. The tension was broken by my cousin Rebecca's arrival from the kitchen. Is dinner ready? I'm starved, she stopped short, taking in the scene. What's going on? Melissa is having some kind of breakdown, my mother said quickly. Actually, Tyler said, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began, Melissa is finally standing up for herself after years of abuse. And there are too many witnesses here for anyone to pretend it didn't happen. Rebecca's eyes widened as she took in the documents spread across the table, the lineup of supporters beside me, and the barely contained fury on my parents' faces. The moment was interrupted again by a sharp gasp from Stephanie. She had picked up one of the financial documents and was staring at it in horror. Dad, is this true? Did you really divert money from Melissa's college fund to pay for my law school? Her voice shook slightly. You told me my tuition was covered by my own trust. A crack had formed in the united front, and it widened as Jason picked up another document. And this mortgage thing, I didn't know about this, he said, looking genuinely disturbed. I knew we excluded her from Christmas stuff as a family joke, but this goes way beyond that. A family joke? I repeated, my voice breaking slightly. Is that what you thought this was? 17 years of making me feel crazy, unwanted, and forgotten was a joke to you? Jason at least had the decency to look ashamed. It started that way. Stephanie was upset about your art award. And, Jason, be quiet, my father snapped. But the revelation had caught me off guard. My art award? This began because I won a high school art competition? Stephanie's expression shifted from shock to defiance. You weren't even trying. You scribbled that piece in a weekend while I spent months on my college applications. But suddenly, everyone was fawning over your natural talent while my hard work meant nothing. Mom and Dad suggested we teach you a little humility at Christmas, just that once. But then it became a tradition, Jason added, ignoring our father's glare. Every year, it was just what we did. I didn't think about how it must have felt for you. The confession hung in the air, the pettiness of the origin staggering in contrast to the years of systematic abuse it had spawned. Enough of this, my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. Melissa, you will gather these documents and leave my house immediately. Whatever delusions you're suffering from, I will not tolerate this attack on our family. Richard, grandfather William, said firmly, if Melissa leaves, I leave with her. And so does my estate. The implicit threat that William would cut them from his will as well landed like a physical blow. My father's face contorted with fury as he realized he was cornered. What happened next would be seared into my memory forever. My father lunged toward me, his hand raised as if to strike me or grab the documents. Tyler moved instantly, stepping between us with a protective stance that brought my father up short. Don't, Tyler said, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats. The room froze in tableau, my father's rage, Tyler's protection, my mother's horror at the public scene unfolding in her perfect Christmas setting, my siblings' dawning realization of their complicity in something far darker than a family joke. In that charged silence, I gathered the documents with steady hands. I'll be filing these with my attorney tomorrow, unless I receive confirmation that you're willing to discuss restitution. I've prepared copies for each of you to review. I placed folders in front of my parents and siblings. You've had 17 years to pretend I don't exist, I said, looking each family member in the eye. Now you get to decide if that's really what you want, because the next time we meet might be in court. With that, I walked out of the dining room, my alliance following behind me, leaving my family frozen at their Christmas table with the evidence of their betrayal spread before them. The immediate aftermath of my confrontation was chaos. As Tyler, Lauren, Patricia, Dr. Harris and I gathered our coats in the foyer, we could hear the explosion of accusations and denials erupting from the dining room. Did you know about this? Stephanie's voice, high and accusatory, presumably directed at our father. "Don't take that tone with me," my father snapped back. "This family has given you everything. By stealing from Melissa?" Jason's voice, surprisingly firm. "That's not giving, Dad. That's just redistributing." My mother's voice rose above the others, tight with controlled panic. "Everyone needs to calm down. The neighbors will hear." Even in crisis, appearances remained her primary concern. We had just reached the front door when my father stormed into the foyer, his face mottled with rage. "This isn't over," he growled, moving toward me with such aggression that Tyler immediately stepped between us again. "It is for today," Tyler said evenly. "Back up, Richard." My father wasn't used to being challenged, especially in his own home. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, I thought he might actually try to hit Tyler. "Richard!" My grandfather's voice cracked like a whip as he entered the foyer. "You take one more step toward them, and I'm calling the police myself." My father froze, then turned his fury on William. "You've encouraged this delusion. You've always undermined my authority with the children." "Your authority?" William's eyebrows rose. "Is that what you call financial fraud and emotional abuse? Authority?" The confrontation might have escalated further if not for a commotion from the dining room, the sound of breaking glass followed by a wail from my mother. "Now look what you've made me do." Stephanie's voice, followed by the slam of a door. My father turned and strode back toward the dining room, leaving us to exit into the cold December air. As the door closed behind us, I took my first full breath in what felt like hours. "That was," Lauren began, then trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "Exactly as toxic as expected," Patricia finished for her, squeezing my shoulder. "You did brilliantly, Melissa. I wish I'd had your courage 30 years ago." We retreated to a nearby hotel where we'd reserved rooms, anticipating that returning to my parents' house might not be an option. There, over room service dinner that none of us had much appetite for, we processed what had happened. The most telling thing, Dr. Harris observed, was that at no point did either of your parents express concern for how their actions affected you. Their reactions were entirely self-focused anger at being exposed, fear of consequences, concern about appearances. I nodded, feeling oddly detached. I kept waiting to feel something more satisfaction, perhaps, or closure, but I mostly feel empty. "That's normal," Dr. Harris assured me. "You've been carrying this for so long. Now that you've set it down, there's a void where it used to be. It will fill with healthier things in time." Over the next few days, the fallout continued. My phone exploded with texts and calls, some from extended family who had witnessed the confrontation, others from my immediate family in various states of denial, rage, or sudden remorse. My cousin Rebecca, who had always seemed to enjoy my exclusion, sent a particularly telling message. "I always thought it was just a weird family tradition. I didn't know about the financial stuff. That's messed up." Aunt Kathleen, who had noticed my exclusion years ago but never intervened, left a tearful voicemail. "I should have said something. I'm so sorry, Melissa. I saw what was happening, and I did nothing." The most surprising development came from Jason. 3 days after Christmas, he asked to meet at a neutral coffee shop. "I've been looking through the documents," he said, his usual confidence replaced by genuine discomfort. "I didn't know about the mortgage fraud or how much was diverted from your trust. I mean, I knew you were getting less, but I thought it was because you chose art school instead of business school. And that justified excluding me from Christmas for 17 years?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious about his rationalization. He stared into his coffee. "It started as Stephanie's idea. She was jealous of that art award, the one that got you a write-up in the local paper when you were 15. Mom and Dad had always made everything a competition between us. And suddenly you were getting attention for something she couldn't compete with. So she decided I shouldn't get Christmas presents." "It sounds so petty saying it out loud," he admitted. "That first year, it was just supposed to be a one-time thing. But then it became this. I don't know, family tradition? The way Dad described it, you were too artsy to care about material things anyway. Each year, it was easier to go along with it than question it. And the financial aspects?" His discomfort deepened. "I knew my trust was doing well. I didn't ask questions about yours. Dad handled all of that. I wasn't sure I believed his claimed ignorance, but his willingness to meet and discuss it at all was more than I'd expected. What happens now? He asked. That depends on all of you, I replied honestly. I meant what I said, either there's acknowledgement and restitution, or there's legal action. I'm done being the family ghost. My conversation with Jason was followed by a much less pleasant interaction with Stephanie, who cornered me outside my apartment building the next day, her perfect blonde hair disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. You've ruined everything, she spat, her voice shaking. Dad's business partners are asking questions. The country club is buzzing with gossip. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? I didn't do this to the family, Stephanie. I responded calmly, grateful for all the practice with Dr. Harris. I just exposed what was already happening. It wasn't like that, she insisted. It was just a stupid Christmas thing that got out of hand. You're making it sound like we were monsters. And the financial fraud? Was that also just a stupid thing? Her expression flickered between anger and uncertainty. Dad said your trust was invested differently because you weren't interested in the family business. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected her. There's a difference. Our conversation ended unresolved, with Stephanie still more concerned about the family's reputation than about the harm done to me. But the seed of doubt had been planted. She no longer seemed certain of the narrative she'd accepted for years. The most dramatic confrontation came from my parents, who arrived unannounced at my studio a week after Christmas. My father was all bluster and threats. You will cease this slander immediately, he demanded, standing rigidly in my workspace, surrounded by my art pieces he'd never bothered to look at before. This vendetta stops now, or there will be consequences. There already have been consequences, Dad, I replied. 17 years of them. For me? While my father continued his threatening monologue, I noticed my mother wandering around the studio, actually looking at my work for what seemed like the first time. She paused in front of a large canvas, an abstract representation of emotional absence, primarily in cold blues and negative space. You're very talented, she said quietly, almost to herself. I never really looked before. Barbara! My father's sharp tone pulled her attention back. We're not here to admire her hobby. Something in my mother seemed to crack at that moment. It's not a hobby, Richard. She's exhibited in New York. She's been reviewed in art journals. My father stared at her in disbelief. Whose side are you on? I'm not sure anymore, my mother replied, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. I knew about the Christmas thing. I didn't know about the mortgage fraud, or draining her trust that badly. We did what was necessary to protect the family assets, my father insisted. Melissa was never going to appreciate or manage her inheritance properly. Because I'm an artist? I asked. Because you've always rejected everything this family values, he snapped. You think your little paintings matter? Your sister and brother are building something lasting. You're just playing around with colors and calling it a career. And there it was, the true heart of the issue, laid bare after 17 years. I wasn't excluded because of anything I had done. I was excluded because of who I was. Because my very existence challenged my father's rigid view of what had value. I think you should leave, I said quietly. My lawyer will be in touch about the restitution terms. This isn't over. My father threatened as my mother tugged him toward the door. Actually, it is, I replied. One way or another, this ends now, either with acknowledgement and restitution or with legal consequences. But I will not be erased anymore. After they left, I stood in my studio surrounded by my work, the career my father had dismissed, as playing around with colors, and felt something unexpected. Pity. My father was so limited by his own narrow vision that he couldn't recognize the value in anything that didn't fit his predefined categories of success. Over the following weeks, the family continued to fragment along fault lines that had been present but ignored for years. Extended family members took sides, with the majority expressing shock and support for me once the details became known. A few remained loyal to my parents, insisting that family matters should remain private, the classic defense of those who benefit from secrecy. The most significant development came from grandfather William, who called a family meeting to announce he was revising his will to correct the gross inequities that had been permitted to develop. My father and siblings were not pleased. For my part, I focused on healing and moving forward. The confrontation had been necessary, but it wasn't an end point. It was a beginning. A beginning of a life where I wasn't defined by my family's rejection, where I could build connections based on genuine care rather than obligation. Tyler moved in officially, and together we created our own traditions to replace the painful ones I'd grown up with. Lauren remained a steadfast friend, and Patricia became the aunt I should have known all along. And slowly, the emptiness I'd felt after the confrontation began to fill with something new. Not closure, exactly, but possibility. The possibility of a life unshackled from the weight of being forgotten. 1 year after the Christmas confrontation, I found myself in my light-filled apartment, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me. Tyler was stringing popcorn garlands with Lauren while Patricia arranged a platter of Christmas cookies. Grandfather William sat in the most comfortable chair, regaling my friends with embarrassing stories from my mother's childhood. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt no anxiety about the holiday, only a warm sense of belonging that I'd created for myself. The legal and financial aftermath of my confrontation had been complex but necessary. With the help of skilled attorneys, the fraudulent mortgage had been addressed, with my parents required to pay it off in full plus penalties. My trust fund had been partially restored through a settlement that avoided the public exposure of a court case, something my parents had been desperate to prevent. Grandfather William had indeed revised his will, ensuring that I would receive an equal portion of his estate alongside my siblings. But more importantly, he had become a regular part of my life, visiting my studio, attending my exhibitions, and proving that family connections could be nurturing rather than destructive. The emotional aftermath had been more complicated than the financial one. My father had initially refused any meaningful acknowledgement of his behavior, maintaining that he had only done what was best for the family. But as the legal consequences became unavoidable and extended family members increasingly expressed their disapproval, his position had become untenable. 6 months after the confrontation, he had sent a carefully worded letter clearly drafted by an attorney, expressing regret for any misunderstanding or distress without actually admitting wrongdoing. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts. I accepted it as the most he was capable of offering. My mother's response had been more surprising. After several months of silence, she had reached out to Patricia, her long-estranged sister, and through that reconnection had eventually contacted me. Our first meeting had been awkward and tense, but subsequent conversations revealed something unexpected. My mother had been trapped in her own prison of appearances and expectations. "I'm not excusing what I did," she said during one of our carefully boundaried coffee meetings, "but I want you to know that it began before you were born." My mother did the same to Patricia, and her mother did it to her brother. It's a family pattern I never questioned until now. Breaking that pattern had become important to her, though our relationship remained tentative and carefully managed. I wasn't ready to fully trust her, but I was open to the possibility that people could change if they genuinely wanted to. Stephanie had been the slowest to acknowledge her role. Her identity had been so wrapped up in being the good daughter that recognizing her participation in my exclusion threatened her entire self-image. Our interactions remained limited and often difficult. Jason, surprisingly, had made the most genuine efforts at reconciliation. He had approached me with no expectations, offering only to listen to the full impact of what had happened from my perspective. Those conversations had been painful but healing, and while we would never have the easy sibling relationship portrayed in heartwarming Christmas movies, we had developed something authentic. "You've built something beautiful here," Tyler said, pulling me from my reflections as he wrapped an arm around my waist. "Look around." I did. The apartment was transformed with tasteful decorations, the air fragrant with cinnamon and pine. But what made it beautiful wasn't the decorations, it was the people. The genuine connections, the absence of the walking on eggshells tension that had defined my family gatherings. My healing journey had been supported not just by therapy with Dr. Harris, but by channeling my experiences into my art. My latest exhibition, titled Absence and Presence, explored the themes of visibility, belonging, and chosen family. It had received critical acclaim and sold out entirely, a success that validated my father's dismissive playing with colors in the most satisfying way. As we gathered around the table for our Christmas Eve dinner, I realized something profound. The empty space inside me that had been created by years of exclusion and gaslighting had been filled not by revenge or vindication, but by authenticity and chosen connections. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass, "I want to toast to all of you." A year ago, I was finally brave enough to confront the pain that had defined my holidays for 17 years. But confrontation was only the beginning. Healing has come through building this. I gestured around the table. A family chosen for love rather than obligation, for acceptance rather than conformity. "To chosen family," Tyler echoed, raising his glass. "And to breaking patterns," Patricia added, with a meaningful glance at William. "To no longer being forgotten," Lauren said firmly. As we clinked glasses, I felt the final pieces of something settle within me. The journey hadn't been about forcing my biological family to include me. It had been about claiming the space to exist fully as myself, whether they acknowledged me or not. Later that evening, as everyone chatted by the fireplace, I slipped away to my studio space. On an easel sat my newest work in progress, a vibrant exploration of joy and connection that contained none of the haunting empty spaces that had characterized my earlier work. Tyler found me there, contemplating the canvas. "Different energy," he observed. "Different artist," I replied. "Or at least, an artist who's no longer defined by absence." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How healing isn't a destination," I said thoughtfully. "It's a practice. There are still moments when I feel that old hurt, when I wonder if I could have done something differently to make them love me properly. And then, I remember that their limitation was never my fault. That I deserved to be seen and included, not because of anything I did or didn't do, but simply because I existed." I turned to face him. "And I remember that I'm surrounded by people who see me clearly and love me anyway." The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke to find presents with my name under our tree, cards addressed specifically to me, and a place set for me at breakfast. Small things that most people would take for granted, but that represented everything I had been denied. As I sipped coffee and watched the people I loved open the gifts I had carefully chosen for each of them, I reflected on the lesson of the past year, that sometimes healing doesn't come from fixing what was broken, but from building something new entirely. My family had pretended to forget me every Christmas for 17 years. My decision to confront them had indeed made them furious. But in that fury had come clarity, and in that clarity, freedom not just from their treatment of me, but from the need for their validation at all. I had found something far more valuable than inclusion in a toxic family system. I had found the courage to create a life where I was not just included but celebrated, not just seen but understood, not just present but essential. And that was the greatest gift of all. Have you ever experienced family traditions that felt more like exclusion than inclusion? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more authentic life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be seen and celebrated. Thank you for being part of my chosen family this holiday season. Wishing you peace, healing, and the courage to create the connections that nurture rather than diminish you.